I'm here with Michael Sugirin, Global Head of Trade and Open Account Implementation at Standard Chartered Bank, and we're here to talk about the digitalization of trade and supply chain finance. So Michael, thank you for joining us. First of all, take us through some of the benefits of digitalization in trade and supply chain finance.
I think these are very exciting times in trade finance. If you think about how trade finance has worked for the last 100 years, we're pretty much working on the same instruments, which is essentially paper, right? And paper has been a very pervasive tool within internally as well as externally, how we engage internally on operations, but also most importantly, how we engage with our clients today. There has been a lot of attempts in the last 20, 30 years in terms of how do we remove paper from that trade finance value chain. A lot of these attempts have been really focused more around the internal optimization, and we are seeing some of the fruits being born now as we're seeing OCR technology, as we're seeing NLP technology becoming much more mature, right? But what is, I think, the most important is the last mile, which is ultimately how do we engage our clients end-to-end in a digitized fashion, in a digitized manner. And that starts with creating a standard not just around the file format and how we communicate, but also how we communicate from a channels perspective, right? And I think if you think back over the last 10, 15 years, it was all around how do we, from a client's perspective, connect to a bank. That means to a proprietary channel. That obviously is changing very rapidly now with the emergence of third-party platforms. That is also changing with the birth of third-party consortiums that are either developed as part of industries or part of regulatory platforms. So these are exciting opportunities that are now emerging, or enablers that are emerging, which allows ultimately to create a much different and deeper integration with clients on a digitized manner, which therefore, ultimately, to your question, what are the benefits? It allows for much faster response time, it allows for much faster client service, and also allows for new creation of potential trade finance services or financial service around an invoice, around a purchase order, around visibility that we've never had before.
And what are some of the challenges in delivering those new business models in terms of moving from paper to completely digitalized processes?
I think there's a couple of 2 or 3 areas which are still a challenge. I think one is the regulatory environment. It is not homogeneous, right? You think about the different stakeholders and the different supervisory bodies that we essentially need to adhere to. It's a very large spectrum of regulators that we work here in Asia, or regulatory bodies that are existing in Europe or in the US. On the flip side, there's a number of regulatory initiatives that are underway. For example, the National Trade Platform in Singapore, or the E-Trade Connect platform in Hong Kong, that are showing how regulators are taking proactive stance and initiatives forward, how to potentially digitize trade finance. Then I think the second set of challenges is something, as I talked about, is really around standards. And how do you set a common standards around file formats? How do you set a standards around communication? That is different from industry to industry, from country to country, and from ERP to ERP, essentially. But I think here, on the flip side, the opportunity now with the birth of APIs a couple of years ago, it really creates now an opportunity to create standard connectivity from not just from client to the bank, but also multiple other stakeholders that are involved as part of the trade finance ecosystem. I thought you brought up an interesting point about culture, which is, if you think about how we've done trade finance over the last 100 plus years, trade finance has really not evolved all that much from a cultural perspective, right? We still underwrite risk, and we still monitor risk the same way you have done many decades ago, right? But now, with the ability and access of data, being able to, in real-time, access information of a container or vessel that moves across, being able to access and see visibility end-to-end, really allows for much more different way of approaching trade finance. And that also has given rise to a new set of culture and creates a new paradigm shift in how we're looking at trade finance.
And how are Standard Chartered looking to drive the adoption of those new digitalized processes and emerging paradigms, and driving collaboration across the wider trade ecosystem?
It's a very important point. I think commercialization is in the heart of everything we do, because I think the last 15, 20 years when we had the first initial internet boom, we struggled with how do we actually now commercialize some of these internet platform, e-commerce platforms out there. So it's all about how do we collaborate closer with some of these fintechs. And that also involves not just new technology, but also involves collaborating with our client. And understanding our client's ecosystem is part of that commercialization effort, because our clients, they are involved with many and multiple different stakeholders today, whether it's their buyers and suppliers, that's the immediate ecosystem. So the entire ecosystem that they're exposed to also provides an opportunity for collaboration. And that makes, if you think about APIs, again, a level playing field that we've never seen before.
Thank you, Michael, for joining us. That was really insightful, and thank you for watching.